Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Open Networks 2022 Work Plan webinar, a run through. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes.
That will not. Okay. That was weird.
And if we could move to the next slide, I will just chat everyone through the way things will work today. So I'm sure you're familiar with how we run our webinars, but just a reminder, we will be recording this session and then we'll be sharing this recording publicly afterwards for anyone who would like to watch it and engage with it after the webinar itself. As always, we would welcome any questions, thoughts, comments in the chat function, or you can also raise your hand. The way that we'll be doing the presentations today is everyone will have 10 to 15 minute slots, which will include time for Q&As. So you can pop your questions in the chat whilst they're presenting, and then we'll come to them. We'll also have a slot at the end of this hour-and-a-half session for any questions too. And what I will do is hand over to Sotiris, our chair, to have a quick run through the agenda and a top line reminder of the programme and the webinar today.
Thank you, Emily, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us for this webinar. So we've got an hour and a half. I'll keep it very brief. I'll give a little bit of an introduction, and then I'm going to hand over to Farina, who's going to talk high level about the scope, but also talk about the challenge group and some of the governance changes that we are doing this year. We'll then go into the work streams, and we have here my colleagues from the various networks working together in Open Networks. So Ben Godfrey from WPD is the lead for flexibility services, so he will run us through that. Ian Povey from ENW, he will take transmission distribution planning. We've got Jim Cardwell from Northern Power Grid talking about connections information provision. Steve Atkins will cover DSO transition, and then Andy Wainwright from the ESO will run workstream for whole energy systems. We've allowed 10 to 15 minutes for each workstream. That should be sufficient for a very quick run through of the workstream and a couple of clarification questions. So the most important element here and your contribution is to raise those questions, make those points, because even in the clarification questions, we get value and we get insights in terms of what we potentially could be adding on the scope. But of course, any other points you have, and as they come on in your mind, please straight in the chat. So let's make this as interactive as possible. The purpose is for us to run through the scope, but we also want your feedback. And finally, Emily will run us through some of the communication and engagement aspects of the project, and I'll do a very, very quick wrap up. Okay, so if we go on to the next slide. Cool. All right. So Open Networks, we have been going on for 5 years. Sometimes known as the quiet revolution. We've been working in the background to make sure that networks are ready to enable net zero and make the various commitments our government is making reality. So we've been working in areas such as flexibility services, connections, whole energy systems. And one of the key, for example, achievements over the last 3 or 4 years is the boom we've seen in distribution level flexibility. And the work we've been doing in Open Networks has really fueled that through standard products, common agreements, and really get all the companies to share the knowledge and accelerate the transition. So we've been all about standardization, simplification, transparency, collaboration, and really responding to stakeholder feedback. And that's where your input becomes crucial. We are responsive, we need the feedback, right? And on the backdrop of the latest Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan, the backdrop of COP26, of all the government strategies that have been published, 2022 is really a critical year. And to do that, to reflect that, we are engaging in the scope of our plan for 2022 earlier than we've ever done, and we are making changes to the governance to make it as inclusive of stakeholders as we can at this stage. So we are changing, we are upping our game to make sure that 2022, which is also the last year of this price control for distribution companies, really delivers on the key milestones that we need. So without any further delay, I'm going to pass on to Farina, that's going to run us through some of the governance changes and the scope. Farina, over to you.
Thank you, Sotirios. Hello, everyone. So I think, as Sotirios has said, 2022 is going to be another critical year for the Open Networks program. So we are looking at ramping up our efforts to enable net zero. So as Sotirios highlighted earlier, delivering all of this change in collaboration with the wider industry is going to be more important than ever for us. So as part of that, we have launched two main publications from our site. So the first one is a consultation on our draft work plan for next year. So as part of this, we have basically, in response to stakeholder feedback, we've set out our best view of areas of work and priorities for next year. We are currently consulting on that, and that's going to be open until the 16th of November. So we've got a few links here to make the content more accessible for everyone. And then in parallel to that, we've also launched a call for participation to the wider industry to come and join a challenge group that we are setting out. So in the next few slides, I'll talk a little bit more about the challenge group and run you through, how we've set up the governance and the structure for that. But we've got a few useful links here for everyone. The call for participation is going to be open until the 16th as well, and we'd encourage all of you to have a look at it and express your interest for joining the group. So if you go on to the next slide, please, slide 7. Yep. So I'll just give you a little bit of background on the challenge group and where that's really come from. So as part of our work for this year, we made a commitment to look at our governance, and particularly to look at how we can work more closely with the industry and basically have more opportunities for collaboration. And as you can see, there are a few key drivers here for that. We've already talked about net zero, and the need for us to deliver more, deliver faster, and fully we recognize the need to work with the industry to be able to do that. Also, more recently, we've seen the Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan. So clearly, as part of that, there is a clear mandate for the Open Networks program to work with the industry to help deliver the ambitions on flexibility. And then we've also had stakeholder feedback over the last few months telling us that people want open networks to collaborate even more. So we basically, in response to that, we kicked off the work on open governance to look at how we can work more collaboratively with the industry. So as part of that review, we identified a proposal to set up a challenge group. If you go to the next slide. So as part of that, we are setting up a challenge group for next year, and the challenge group gives it's basically giving interested stakeholders a bigger role in the project. So basically, it's giving them a bigger voice in the program, and it's giving them the opportunity to come work with us and shape the direction of the program, our priorities, and the outcomes that we deliver. And essentially, in a nutshell, the challenge group would be offering a more formal challenge function on behalf of the wider industry. I think in terms of how that would really work, so we would kick the group off in January next year. Initially, they would help us shape the priorities and our work plan. Then, once we've kind of agreed the main areas of work, the challenge group will then kind of, review key areas of work and, help provide that challenge function to that. And then, we'd also be looking at the, basically having mid-year reviews with the challenge group where we would present progress. And, we really see a key role there for the challenge group to actually, I guess, challenge us on the progress and, hold us to account, for delivering at pace. And then finally, we'd also see the challenge group members as helping to facilitate stakeholder engagement within their areas. I think initially, like with the challenge group, given our mandate to deliver a common framework for flexibility by 2023, as we've seen in the Smart Systems Plan, we think that, the interest and focus of the group initially is going to be on topics that relate to flexibility. But, having said that, we will welcome and consider other topics as necessary. In terms of the structure and the way it works, we see the challenge group, basically being composed of non-network representatives, and the challenge group will have an independent chair that will also have representation at our steering group. We'll talk a bit more about governance and how it fits in with the other groups in a few slides. But as I mentioned earlier, we are kind of setting this up through an open process and, inviting the industry to come and express their interest for it. Yes, so in terms of frequency, the group will be meeting every 2 months, starting in January. If you go to the next slide. So I mentioned governance. So I think basically like where this challenge group, how this fits in with the governance, we'd have the challenge group set up, and this will be one of our mechanisms for getting stakeholder engagement and collaboration. So alongside that, we are also going to have a dissemination forum that will basically be open for anyone to join, and that will help us get broader engagement from the industry. We'll also continue to have the option open for user forums. So that's something we introduced this year. And stakeholders will have the opportunity to come and work alongside the product teams in actually developing those initial proposals that we set out. I think in parallel to all of that, we'll continue to have all the other stakeholder engagement mechanisms that we've already facilitated over the years, things like focus groups, webinars with the industry, public consultations. So I think all of this, the challenge group and the dissemination forum are basically the main changes from what we've had in previous years. On the right hand side, it basically shows the breakdown of the challenge group. So we've identified the various stakeholder groups, and we are proposing to set up the challenge group with 19 non-network industry representatives. I think so far the response that we've seen has been really great. So we've got quite a few applications coming in. We'd encourage all of you to have a look at it and express your interest in joining the group as well, and also sharing it with your colleagues or people within your segment of the industry. So if we go to the next slide, please, slide 10. Yep. So in terms of timelines, so the call for participation, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be open until the 16th of November. So this will also be alongside this, we're also consulting on our scope. And then our view is to basically kick off the challenge group in January. So I think that's all I've got to say in terms of the challenge group. And I'll now hand over to, I don't know if there's any questions at this point, but
yes, Farina, there's a question. How do we define a demand customer in context to the user forum?
I think that's a very good question. I think we've intentionally kind of kept these stakeholder group descriptions quite high level. I think basically like, the demand customer, we've put that under the category of flexibility market participants. So we wouldn't, we'd be open to considering, all types of customers really. So I think, yeah, we're not kind of narrowing that down to a particular type of demand customer. I hope that answers the question.
That's it in terms of the questions.
Okay, thank you. So I'll now hand over to Ben Godfrey, who is the chair for our flexibility work. So we'll now kind of step through, the different areas of work that we've got, and each of the leads will talk you through that. Sorry, I think we've got a hand up as well at the moment.
Mark, over to you.
Sorry, coming in late with a question there. Just asking, so on that previous slide, you had demonstrated that there were certain seats for the challenge group. Just worth wondering how you are going to allocate those in accordance with the applications. What's the process for deciding who gets what seat, as it were?
Thanks, Mark. I think that's a really good question. Yeah, so I guess we've kind of set that out. So I think the way we see it at the moment, I think we do want to kind of, I guess, manage numbers in the challenge group, and we've kind of we're proposing to do that by setting out a certain number of seats per stakeholder group. But at the same time, it's something that, we're not going to be too precious about. I think where we do get a significant amount of applications for a particular stakeholder group, and it does come down to us having to make a decision. Basically, we've kind of set out a questionnaire that, different applicants can, share information with us through. So as part of that, we'll make an assessment on, how much does our work actually impact them, what contributions can they make to it, and also, I guess, how much industry feedback they can actually bring back through to the forum. So I think we would then make a decision on that basis. But I think, as I've said, that, if we do get more representatives than the seats, it is something that we will be flexible about. But I guess in the end, we do want to be able to manage numbers.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, no, that's fine. Thank you for that.
Okay. Right. Over to Ben to talk to us about flexibility.
Excellent. Thanks, Farina. So my name is Ben Godfrey. I chair the flexibility work stream on Open Networks. Flexibility, I think, is equally as important, if not more important, than installing generation on the network and decarbonising our energy sector. And we've made some real great progress within this on the network side to create and develop markets for flexibility to be able to participate in and draw the benefits from that. As Satiris said earlier on, what we've tried to set out this year is set forward a work programme that really delivers on some of the key benefits and outputs of flexibility and starts growing participation in that market and enabling greater and wider opportunities. And we've set out this work programme earlier than we would have done in order to convey that out to the marketplace and also explain some of the great things that we're doing. At its heart, the flexibility work stream is really looking at monitoring the progress that we're making towards flexibility. So keeping a finger on the pulse on the different speeds and opening of access to different markets for flexibility. But also it's key for delivering some of the actions and outputs from the Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan. So coordinating all that activity is the key job for this particular work stream. And we've got one of the largest programs of work the largest program of work across Open Networks, recognising the sort of depth and breadth of the activities that we need to undertake to get flexibility embedded and improve that situation. If you go on to the next slide, we can start diving down into some of the timescales across this particular piece of work. So we've got a suite of 9 different products that we are working on. Many of these are improving and developing some of the things that we've already built on. So they're coming from a really good foundation. So the common evaluation methodology, we're looking to consult further on some of the changes that we want to make to ensure that the tool can really pull in all the benefits of flexibility and maximise the opportunities for delivering and realising that benefit so that it can be calculated and that benefit stated when looking at investment decisions on the network. We've got some more work around the procurement process, so developing and evolving some of our products so that we've got a consistent set of standardised terms and conditions across not both the distribution, but also across some of the relevant products for the ESO as well. So really looking across whole electricity systems to establish those common ways for procuring routes to procuring flexibility. Dispatch interoperability is about looking at the different signals that are used to be able to make flexibility happen on the network, and ensuring that those are developed using sort of common principles and as much standardization as possible. And that should really reduce the barriers to entry for people looking to participate in those flexibility markets. Within that product, we're also looking at settlement. They are two separate activities, the dispatch and the settlement, but they are very heavily dependent on each other, and so hence we've bolted these together into the same product, and it's sequentially going to be looking at so settlement very much a second half activity for next year, but making sure that we've got common approaches and standardization of that so that we can really embed the benefits of flexibility across wider markets. And then this standard agreement for flexibility, again, looking at ESO and distribution collaboration on a single set of contracts, and that will really ensure that we've got identical treatment across products and across contracts across the whole electricity system. On to the next slide is the second half of these projects that we're going to be looking at. Primacy rules, a real interesting one, ensuring that when we are dispatching flexibility, there isn't any conflict between different products and different services run for either national system operator or regional distribution system operators, making sure that we can understand a good balance of how those products are run in collaboration rather than running against each other, and ensuring that that works to deliver, you know, the best whole system outcome. We're also going to be taking the opportunity next year to review our flexibility products and make sure that these remain stackable, and there's nothing, no barriers identified or reasons for why those products can't be arranged either adjacent timescales or within the same time horizons. And then we're going to be looking at other consolidations of flexibility products as and when the maturity in those areas reach a certain level, and taking that forward. Carbon reporting is a really interesting one, so we're going to be ensuring that flexibility products have a common approach to carbon reporting, so that we can really embody that and understand the full impact of flexibility. A&M and curtailment information is something that we're going to review to improve the information to markets and see how these can interact with flexibility markets. And this is a sort of key piece of work that will deliver some of the outputs of the sort of feed into some of the potential for the significant code review. And then finally, we've got this last product, this P0, which is the overarching common framework for flexibility. It's something that's established from the Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan, understanding that all these different building blocks are going to be pulled together and make sure that there is sufficient interdependency and linkages between all of these elements. So this overarching common framework for flexibility is something that we're going to develop and continue to integrate all those components so that the sum of all the work that we're doing across this flexibility work stream really delivers on all those goals and outputs. So hopefully it's given you a bit of a taster about the work that we're proposing. Clearly, it's critical to go and get your feedback on this. So if there's any elements that you think that we should really highlight as particular priorities, or any elements that you think are missing, we'd be really keen to hear from you and see how we can develop this package of work and improve it for next year.
Thanks, Ben. We've had a couple of questions through. Would you like me to kick off with them?
Please do, yeah.
So Jeffrey's asked, V3 is mentioned a few times. V3 of what? Version 3.
Version 3.
Sorry, I've just realised it's V3 of the CEM. What is the CEM?
Okay, certainly. Okay, so the common evaluation methodology is a way for distribution networks to value and price the benefits of flexibility against some other alternative approach, be that conventional reinforcement or some other innovative solution. When you're comparing a capital expenditure with a sort of service-based products, that will be perhaps have some sort of different pricing led by markets. You need a robust way of understanding the costs and the benefits, and so you can compare those between the two. So in order to ensure that there's a consistent decisions being made when we're comparing conventional reinforcement, other innovative solutions and flexibility, this CEM has been developed. So version 1 was very much looking at how we could price flexibility, look at the availability and the utilization and build that into a particular cost to compare against the cost of borrowing borrowing money to deliver conventional reinforcement. Version 2 is about putting together those carbon benefits and having a look at the option value. Flexibility is a flexible way, so perhaps there should be some greater value rather than in order to greater value on that flexibility, so that we're not destined to a particular delivery pathway. Version 3 will be about pulling together some of those elements, but also seeking wider feedback from the market about, what are the other intangible benefits or quantifiable benefits from flexibility, and how can we build that together into the decision-making process to make sure that flexibility is, fully realised for all the benefits both within networks, but perhaps wider external. So, the societal benefits or generation-led benefits that we can also take into account.
I hope that answers your question. We've got a couple more. So is anything being done to specifically look at helping to bring small-scale flexibility to market as identified in BEIS's Smart Systems and Flex Plan?
Yes, so the answer to that is very much so. Much of the standardization of the procurement process and the contracts is about trying to scale up some of this activity so that it's not a bespoke process that's very tricky for aggregators and individuals to participate. By applying sort of blanket terms and conditions and standardized processes, then we can really widen out this approach, not just to people who are kind of experts within this field, but also for aggregators and suppliers that can pull forward products from the domestic market. We are also looking at our products as well. So certainly one of the sustained products that has been developed under Open Networks is a much more simpler interpretation of flexibility and a much more kind of lower level. So we're expecting lots of domestic services to be aggregated up and offered through that sustained product. Again, we'll review the success of that, but I think you'll hopefully have seen from a few of the procurement activities and announcements from the different network operators that domestic flexibility is starting to really flourish in this environment, and we should see a lot more domestic flex aggregated and brought forward into the next few months and years.
I hope that answered your question, Matt. And then final question is, what is being reviewed as part of the review on current approaches to settlement DSO services?
That's an excellent question. So flexibility markets from distribution network operators have been evolving, and I think to date there's been a heavy focus on standardization of the feeding in processes, so making sure that the procurement processes, contracts, signposting of information, different flexibility products are all standardized, so we've got that approach. Settlement is one of the back-end processes that really is on the next step for review. So what we want to do is to understand the commonality of approaches between all the different network operators and how they look at things like baselining and feed that through into the settlement processes, with a view that if we can get a common approach and implementation for settlement, what kind of data is required for and how do those processes sequentially follow through from each other, then that will really enable standardization of settlement, and we can then look for the appropriate way of how to undertake that activity. Can there be third parties, other marketplaces that can look to undertake that settlement activity and really embody that settlement activity within different marketplaces and platforms. So very much looking at standardization as a lever to enable third parties to participate wider in delivery of that activity.
Great. And we've got one final question, which is there any action planned to further the work on queue management and storage, for example, evaluating the merits of 2 storage units with different durations?
In terms of sort of queue management, that's typically more a T&D activity, and so perhaps I might I think it's covered in some of the products that we're going to be reviewing through the rest of the open networks. But if it's not sufficiently answered, we'll circle back on that at the end of the session, if that's okay.
We'll put a pin in that one for now.
Good.
Great. Okay, that's all the questions that have come through so far, but Ben will be here for the duration of the webinar. If you have any other questions, just feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll move on to the next speaker.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Emily. My name's Ian Povey from Electricity Northwest, and I'm the chair of Workstream 1B, which, as the title suggests, is focused on transmission distribution planning. It's a little bit broader than that, if I'm honest, because it looks at operational stuff as well as planning stuff. Ben's just highlighting how the distribution networks are changing and changing quite rapidly. For a number of years now, we've had generation being installed onto the distribution network in greater quantities. And now with the products and the work that we've been doing, as Ben described, to get flexibility to maximize the use of the network, that's meant there's been a greater requirement for distribution network operators to liaise with National Grid so that they know what's happening on our network, we know what's happening on their network, both in the planning timescales, but as I said before, in the operation timescales. So that's what this product is really looking to address, the practical areas that are falling out of some of the work that Ben was describing. You'll notice on the 5 areas there that we're looking to work on next year, that they don't all follow in numerical order. There are some missing numbers. That's because of work we've done in previous years has been taken forward into grid code modifications, distribution code modifications. So the work that we do here may not be the final answer. It takes forward and gets changes into codes and licenses so that we can actually implement these things. And that brings into focus the second thing, bullet point on that box at the top, that we're supporting license obligations that are emerging and are being implemented over the next coming years. So if we move on to the next slide, I can talk about each of the 5 products in detail. Starting with product 2, which is future energy scenarios. We have for a number of years now, for a couple of years, been working with Grid to try and improve the future energy scenarios that Grid have been producing for 10 years or so now. And we've done that by establishing standard building blocks that deliver a golden thread through assumptions we make in our equivalents to the FES, i.e. the DFESs. There'll be a golden thread of assumptions running through both the DFES and the FES, such that although not the same, they are based on the same assumptions. And what we'll be doing going forward next year is to look at those assumptions and build on them, and annually we look to improve the work that we're doing on those assumptions. There is a specific piece of work that we'll be doing, looking at getting commonality on standardizing the naming of Grid supply points to make it easier to see the assumptions between Grid and the transmission operators. There's also another piece of work going on in product 2, which is to establish a best view scenario. By best view, we mean the one that is probably the one most likely to happen. It doesn't stop us doing our normal FES scenarios, which give you the broad envelope of different assumptions. This one is a best view that will help in work for the product I'll describe next, i.e. developing our network plans. Also helps with week 24 reporting. It helps with long-term development statement reporting. So this best view will be implemented next year. Moving on to product 5, network development plan. Already this year, we've published our network capacity plan, which is the forerunner to the network development plans. Network development plans are an actual license requirement that will kick in April, May of next year. So what we've been doing this year is developing a form of statement which all DNOs will adopt, so that when you look at a network development plan in my company, Electricity North West, you'll see something similar to what you might see in UKPN or Northern Power Grid. So we will be publishing our network development plans in alignment with that form of statement next year. We won't stop there. We'll move on to take stakeholder engagement to say, how does that network development plan work with stakeholders? Are there improvements that we could make? And if so, we'll be progressing those as we move on through the year. Going on to product 6, the operational distributed energy resource visibility and monitoring. What have we already done on this one? Well, we've developed case studies, and for each of those case studies, which might be how DNOs might use improved visibility for their own active network management. Another case study might be National Grid and the operation of their network. Greater visibility of DER will help them in that respect. Another case study was Black Start planning. So for each of those case studies, we've already developed functional specifications and then developed a CVA to say how worthwhile each of those studies would be to have greater visibility. What we're looking to do is build on that next year and extend the CVAs to include other types of visibility of DER. So we're moving into more the operational forecasting, market data, and some more static data like protection settings, this, that, and the other. And each of those will be validated by cost-benefit analysis. And those that are recommended to take forward, we'll put together in an implementation plan. Product 7 is looking at operational data sharing. And that's slightly different from product 6 because it's looking at operational data across the whole network in a more holistic fashion. This year, we've looked to baseline the product and see what data is out there and how that is published and made available. So next year, in conjunction with other products, because it does overlap with other products, this one, we will be looking to review and standardize the mechanisms for making this data available. So whether that be through Common Information Model Standard or ICCP links, we'll be looking at that and then putting together an implementation plan for that. And finally, P9, there is a new license requirement on both National Grid and on distribution network owners to publish a coordination register, which will demonstrate that we're working in a whole system manner in an efficient way. So what we've done this year is put together a formal statement, which again will deliver a standardized coordination register across all DNOs and National Grid. So next year we'll be implementing that and publishing our coordination registers. And in a similar fashion to P5, we'll be then taking stakeholder feedback on that and then looking to progress those actions in the remaining part of the year so that we can produce something that stakeholders will really value. So I'm not sure, Emily, are there any questions out there that need to be answered?
Yes, there are a few.
Oh dear.
Right,
I can answer them.
Has there been any thought on how IDNOs are going to be involved in the whole system activities?
IDNOs are a part of Open Networks, and they are not necessarily well represented in some of the products. A lot of the work that we are doing does apply to IDNOs. So, for instance, previous work we did looking at increasing the amount of planning data exchange between DNOs and National Grid also included IDNOs. That has moved on to a distribution code modification. I think just if you want to look up the number, I think it's distribution code modification 2004. And IDNOs are intrinsically involved in that because data that we need to provide grid as DNOs, we don't have all that data. A lot of it is held by IDNOs. So at various stages of these products, we will be engaging with the IDNOs. So I'm looking at product 9. I think that applies to IDNOs equally as much as it does to DNOs. Similarly, network development plans. So as we deliver the output of these products, it will go through the steering group and IDNOs will pick that up in a similar fashion to DNOs. I hope that answers the question.
Great. Next question. How far out does the best for you scenario go? I ask because beyond 5 or so years out, I would imagine the uncertainty gets pretty high.
Yes, it does. That's a good question. The best view scenario actually does go out as far as all the other scenarios, which will be out to 40 years. But the use of it, as you say, becomes a little bit more flaky as you get towards that 40 years. However, we use it for the network development plan, which is out towards 10 years. So, and if you look at how we put together that best view scenario, the early years are very much based on known applications and developments that we're having, and then it's moving forward then as to how we think, government policy will influence that each individual building block within the scenarios. But as you say, as we go out towards 40 years, it gives you a view as to the envelope of what might happen, but probably less trustworthy for application for network development plans in that timescale. Okay.
Okay. On to the next question. is the whole system definition electricity to electricity in this context, as opposed to Ofgem's whole system definition for RIIO-2?
Yeah, what workstream 1B is certainly electricity to electricity definition. I think you'll be hearing from Andy Wayne, my colleague at National Grid later, who will talk about workstream 4, which will look at that broader definition.
Yep, exactly. On P9, the register is good, but are there any plans for actions or implementation of further integration between T&D, particularly in regard to new connections?
Sorry, I'm trying to understand what the driver of that question is. Sorry. You repeat the question.
In relation to P9, the register is good, but are there any plans for action/implementation of further integration between T&D, particularly in regard to new connections?
Right. We would take the feedback on the coordination register and look to improve it. So it may come into that, but it also takes us into other areas where we are already, in terms of in workstream 2, we're looking at publishing data and the reinforcement data associated with DER connections. So we are already moving into that area, not specifically to do with the coordination register, but if you look in the embedded capacity register, it has the elements that are required by DECUSA, but on top of that, it's got the reinforcement element. So that is telling you what connections we've got in the pipeline and what reinforcements we have happening in those areas. But there's also work going on to look at what we will publish in terms of I'm trying to remember the name now, the Appendix G registers, and the ENO's already published those, which show you the limitation on the transmission system as a result of maybe trying to connect on the distribution system. So that work is going, and we're looking to build on that, and not specifically here, but again, there is a review in the long-term development statement, and whether we publish as part of that the Appendix G. Some DNOs already do so, but there may be that might be a case that we all move in that direction.
Thanks, Ian. There was just a final comment on the IDNOs question and INA, kind of about making them part of our working groups, as they're going to be integral to achieving net zero, as DNOs are. I think that might be one maybe for us to take away and have a think about, unless you have any other comment.
Well, the only comment I would have is that we would welcome it. We need to get as broad a views on some of these products as we can. And IDNOs, and my experience of working with IDNOs, as I say, on some distribution code modifications, is that they have got a lot to contribute. And if they can, often the problem is getting the resource to commit to these products. But if the resource is out there and wants to contribute, then they'll be welcome with open arms.
And just handing over to Farina, who I think might have something else to add.
Yep, absolutely support what Ian said. So I think from our side, it's definitely an open invitation. I think, as an example, in our flexibility work stream, we've got a specific seat for INA. So I think we'd be happy to kind of facilitate something similar, particularly on some of the products we've talked about, where we think there are some key touch points with the IDNOs.
Okay, was that the final question for me and Farina?
Yes, it was. So thank you very much, Ian. Just a reminder, he will be around for the rest of the webinar, and we'll hand over to Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. Hopefully you can hear me okay. My screen's gone a little bit glitchy for a moment there.
So I'm covering off on workstream 2. The overall objectives of workstream 2 are to look at enhanced information provision pertinent to the connections process and the contracting processes for flexibility, and also help deliver on whole electricity system needs, particularly standardizing across T&D, so very much a flavour similar to other open networks work streams, and working closely in our case with the data and digitalisation steering group through the ENA, which involves gas and electricity, so really sort of thinking a bit wider there as well. So in terms of the products, we've got 4 here, and a bit as Ian said, well, there's no gaps in the numbers, but there is an out of order. The reason for that is the first 2 of them, embedded capacity register and the connection agreement review, probably the areas where we anticipate the most change probably over the next year, whereas the queue management and interactivity are more into a kind of post-implementation review and correction and improvement, sort of continual improvement kind of cycle. So let's move it on, please, Emily, onto the next slide, and I'll just take people through the products and then see if there's any questions on these. So I'll take you through the first 2 where I've seen the most change, and it's already been the thunder has already been stolen by the question and Ian's response on the embedded capacity register. So this is up to this is, as Ian was saying, this is what we as distribution companies are already presenting to stakeholders on our websites with explaining where we've got reinforcement to enable connections, or also where the flexibility resources are, but down to 1 megawatt size. But the big kind of change here that we're working through at the moment that you can see is in that sort of first couple of, well, the second banner on this one, is extending the scope of that to go down lower in the system, to go down to smaller frame sizes, to go to more sort of distributed, even more distributed resources. So go down to notionally 50 kilowatts is what we're seeking to do. So we're just working through that at the moment. We think there's value here. Particularly to the ESO in terms of it having more visibility of what embedded resources are down there on the distribution networks that can provide flexibility services. And I guess what our aim here is to move from a set of standard format, however separate spreadsheets amongst all the distribution companies, into a more kind of end-to-end database solution across GB. So sort of move it on a notch in terms of its complexity and its sophistication. So that is our ambition. It's a pretty big sort of digitalization step. So we're working with the data and digitalization people to see how that fits in with some of the other things that are going on in the whole open data environment. And also the top line there, which is about including more detail of the existing resources we've got, where they're already providing balancing service to the ESO, try and provide more detail on that as well. So that's kind of we lead off with that one, not only because it's number 1, the product, but also I lead off with it because actually I think in terms of big bits of work in 2022 and ambition, that's probably one of the big ones that we're seeking to do. So the next one, I'll just flip to the bottom, which is the green one, which is the connection agreement review. We've got a review going on at the moment looking at what information we put in connection offers for customers that distinguish clearly between whether it's some kind of firm connection or an active network management connection, or whether it's got some flexibility services associated with it or not. So we're just trying to make sure we're being clear with customers about what those are, and so customers can understand what they're signing up for. So there's a bit of work going on there at the moment, and I guess depending on what we conclude this year, it might ripple through into next year. I guess we just leave it there as a placeholder in effect. And now to go to the more sort of colourful bars here, the orange and the amber, or orange and yellow, if you like. On the queue management, so the connections queue management, this is the one where we are in post-implementation. We went live with new milestones in distribution and transmission contracts. We've got some more codification going through, so there's a custom modification going through, which is the wonderfully entitled CMP 376, which is going through at the moment to make the implementation of connection milestones in connections, put them into contracts. So that's going through at the moment. I guess more generally in that orange queue management, we're into thinking about that sort of review of implementation step that you see stepping into Q3 in terms of what we do there. So we're just sort of keeping an eye on it and see how it comes about, and we'll continue to I guess, listening through the challenge group or through stakeholder interaction to how that's going with people and whether people think it's meeting the aims. And just picking up on Fernando's question, the bar there that says monitoring promotion of flexible connections. I mean, what that's about the promotion of flexible resources. So according to a previous action, the Smart System and Flexibility Plan, we've signed off on the principle that if a flexible resource like a battery can alleviate or help us to navigate otherwise constraints that are stopping other people connecting, that they could be promoted in the queue. So we've signed off on that as a principle. I guess we're eager to understand what examples are out there, because they're few and far between, I guess, at the moment. So Fernando and others, if you've got examples of that, please feed them through, because we're looking to see how that's going, to see what sort of typical use cases that might show up, and how we can move from a signed off principle to an implementation of that, and what that might look like. And finally, in the yellow, application interactivity, again, there's CMP 328 going through at the moment. So that's another CUSC mod, which is looking at cases where transmission can have an impact on distribution. So it's about distribution impact assessments for a connectee that's approaching transmission, but it's going to have a knock-on implication on the distribution system. So once that has concluded, that CUSC mod, we'll then see how the standardized arrangements that we've put in place now across all GBDNOs and transmission, to see what changes might be necessary as a result of that, plus a more general learning as we're going, continual improvement, see if there's any other things coming through from that. So, Emily, any questions?
So we've not had any questions through on the chat. Oh, yes, we have just got one through from Mark. It would be good to see data on queue management decisions during this implementation, i.e. how often are thresholds not being met, how often is the ENA providing leniency, and how many are removed from the queue, seeing the impact of the change.
Yeah, no, great question and great point, Mark, that you make there. I think we are keen to be observing. I guess I talked about stakeholder feedback as life goes on and people experience the operation of these things. They'll be really interested in sort of qualitative comments on that. But I guess also having some data on that and making that available to people might be a good thing as well, just to show you the anonymized throughput through that process. So it's already discussion that we've started having internally, and we'll take that away and see what we can think about in terms of also making that available to show other people what sort of throughput we're getting and what impact that's having. I think that's a useful suggestion. So thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I hope that answers your question. We've had a question offline. How has implementation gone in 2021, and what does this mean for next year, in particular the embedded capacity register and the new queue management milestones?
Right, okay. So I described how a couple of the products were sort of post-implementation now. I guess I think the relevance of that is that one of the principles of open networks, which we're really into now, I mean, the embedded capacity register, Emily, and part of that question, we're on version 3 now. So we went live in October with version 3. So it's not like we put something out there and then it just sits there as shelfware. The idea is we're into improving and refining and moving through time. So the fact we've got to version 3 shows that we've done some really interesting work this year, to align that with some of the engineering recommendations, some of the terminology, again, trying to simplify, standardize, try and drive that through on the embedded capacity register. And I think on the queue management interactivity, I think I probably answered some of that, I think, by saying next year is very much a flavour of, and Mark's point actually about, can we see some data, please? It's about monitoring how we're going, and that really does set a lot of the scene for next year. So we've got embedded capacity register, which is quite a big change, step change is what we're aiming to do with that, to really bring it on and move it to a really different place that it is in today. But the queue management interactivity is very much that, monitor, measure, correct kind of cycle post-implementation that we're looking into 2022.
Great, thanks, Jim. And we've just had a response from Fernando to say thanks for your reply, and he's shared his email address if you'd like to pick up with him offline.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Jim. Just a reminder, Jim will be on the line for the next 30 minutes or so if you do have any other questions. And we are now going to head over to Steve Atkins.
Thanks for that. Yeah, hi, I'm Steve Atkins. I'm DSO Transition Manager for Scottish and Southern Electricity Networks, and I'm the product lead on DSO Transition, workstream lead on DSO Transition. It's fairly straightforward workstream in that really what it's all about is capturing DNO's progress to offering a DSO capability and making sure that we do it in the correct manner. So those are the two key themes from our side. Just to talk a little bit around the DSO roadmap and just talk about where we are with that. It's a continuation of something that's been in place for a couple of years now. This year we had 2 further updates of the DSO roadmap, and that identifies and tracks against key DSO initiatives and developments in this DSO transition. We've had really good feedback from stakeholders, some really good constructive feedback. We've focused this year on accessibility and usability, so hopefully you'll have seen the roadmap improve in terms of its readability, the way you've been able to search it and extract data from it. Its latest iteration has focused on granularity, so you're able to drill down to individual company data as well. So the plan is in 2022 to carry on identifying key DSO initiatives and developments throughout the year, and that'll include relevant innovation projects, network trials, regional development programs in conjunction with the ESO, and the action of public key policy documents from BEIS or Ofgem and how they're taken forward within the Open Networks project. The other area that we focused on is the conflicts of interest and unintended consequences risk register. And this is really looking at potential conflicts of interest and unintended consequences raised by stakeholders, identifying ways to mitigate those and monitor their progress and make sure that we provide visibility and transparency to the industry. We're conscious that we are natural monopolies, and we are wedded to being neutral facilitators of the flexibility market and this transition to a smart grid. And we see this as an absolutely key way to capture those possible conflicts of interest or unintended consequences and make sure we're doing something about them. So this year we simplified the interpretation of the register and increased stakeholder engagement. Nobody likes a risk register, so we're trying to make it as user-friendly as possible. We've demonstrated clear prioritization of red zone risks, so that you can identify, the biggest issues, if you like. We regularly review that with stakeholder engagement, and we've also worked with the ENA's Customer and Social Issues Working Group as well to review risks that have a direct impact on end consumers, and in particular to monitor and advise on vulnerable customer impacts. So in 2022, we'll continue to capture and investigate those potential conflicts of interest and unintended consequences. We'll still be looking for your input on those. We'll continue to identify appropriate mitigation measures and monitor progress on those and make sure we carry on providing visibility of those. And we'll seek to ensure that the developments that are being taken forward in open networks are not leading to unfavourable outcomes for any particular actors in the energy landscapes, in particular vulnerable customers. The last point around workstream 3 is we'll continue to take responsibility for horizon scanning possible impacts on the direction of travel for DSO. So things like the access and forward-looking charges, SCR, the energy future system operator, the DNO ED2 business plans that are being produced at the moment. All of those will give us things that we need to take forward and progress and maintain alignment and consistency between the DNOs, and so we'll continue to look at those areas and make sure that that we work on those and see where we want to pick them up within open networks, and you know, make sure we progress the development of DSO capability and the smart grid to support net zero. Any questions, Emily?
Yes, there are. So it would be good to see /hear. You said we did report for the conflict of interest and unintended consequences register. My perspective is that it's a document that sits on the ENA shelf. Just publishing it isn't enough.
Yeah, I think that's a good challenge. I think that has improved recently. If you go into the document now, there is more of a timeline in terms of how things have been addressed, and you can see where they've moved from you know, from being raised to being solved. But we'll continue to look at that and improve that visibility of that.
Great, I hope that answers your question. And then we've had an offline question just asking about the reliability of the DSO implementation plan. If you could go into that in a bit more detail, Steve.
Yeah, I think this is a key point, and one of the best ways to ensure reliability of the DSO implementation plan is for stakeholders to challenge us on it. And the fact that we've taken the granularity down to individual DNO level, you can, you know, drill down, you can see what your local DNO is doing and challenge them on some of the entries they've put in there. So and DNOs are quite conscious of that, so clearly want to avoid that. So there's that element of stakeholder challenge and transparency that helps to maintain its reliability. But in addition, next year, once this, we've only just moved to this kind of increased level of granularity, but as this granularity kind of embeds in, what we're looking to do is to undertake an independent audit of that DSO implementation plan as well, so that people have got some reassurance that it's being tested.
Great, thanks very much, Steve. And you'll be online for the next 20 minutes or so if there are any other questions. And I'll hand over to Andy now. Last but not least.
Thank you. And I'm conscious of time, and we've got a wrap up at the end, so I'll try and get through this relatively quickly. Hi everyone, my name's Andy Wainwright. I work for National Grid ESO, and I'm the chair of Workstream 4, which is the whole energy systems workstream within the project. So Workstream 4 is a bit different to some of the other workstreams in that it doesn't just contain sort of members from the electricity sector, but also some broader stakeholders, most notably the gas network owners, but also we have on the workstream representatives from Energy UK, the ADE, and Energy Systems Catapult. The workstream itself focuses on the interactions between gas and electricity networks, hence the broader membership. And historically, it's focused on more tangible change in the short term. But in next year's programme, we're beginning to move into a broadening of that remit, looking at more strategic challenges in the transition to net zero. And if we look at the lower part of this slide, the products, it sort of reflects that mix where we've got some of the existing products that we're further enhancing, as others have talked about in their areas, like the whole system CBA and the coordinated gathering of regional data. And then we've got some areas which are looking more strategically, including the work in product 5 on shaping local area energy planning. So if I was to summarise our objectives for the year, I'd say it's probably 3. There's a bit about exploration of the challenges faced by network companies and how we're going to work together to address some of these broader strategic questions on the transition to net zero. There's the actual supporting and the development of frameworks and policies which will make tangible improvements to the way we coordinate in the short term. And there's work we need to do to proactively inform the development of a national framework and policies for local area energy planning. So I think if we look at the next slide, we can go into some of the products in a bit more detail. Is that right? Cool. Hang on a second. So if we start at the top, whole system CBA product 1, this is looking at further developing a CBA tool, which we've had in place now for around a year, and getting stakeholder feedback based on some of the actual use cases that are coming through. The second product, and again reflecting the maturation, it's not in sort of numerical order, is around the coordinated gathering of regional data, where we're supporting and monitoring some of the trials and their outputs on a longer term local authority led approach to gathering regional data. Product 4, local whole system optioneering service, which is really about looking at establishing, if it's warranted, a whole system optioneering service for local authorities so that they can readily get the data they need to inform their local development plans. Product 5, the more strategic piece of work, which is looking at shaping local area energy planning. So this is ensuring there's a coordinated input from electricity and gas networks into this broader work that's been undertaken by Ofgem BEIS and energy system catapults in the development of frameworks and tools for local area energy planning. And then finally, it's a bit lighter touch than some of the other pieces of work. There's some work we need to do to sort of pull together the various innovation projects that network organisations are undertaking at the moment to ensure we're sharing the learnings and collating and disseminating the outputs, which will enable us to move forwards efficiently in a coordinated manner. I think that's all I wanted to say about Workstream 4, Emily, today. I don't know if we had any questions through.
Yes, we've got one that's just come through on the chat. Is P4 a free for local authorities or a pay for service?
I think one of the big, nothing is free in this world. Nothing is free, Jeff. So the question is, you know, who pays at the end of the day? If you look at the way sort of network organisations recover their costs, it's generally through user system charges, which are then recovered across a set of stakeholders. If you look at how local authorities would recover their costs, it would be through ultimately a set of charges at a different base. And one of the things, you know, we're thinking through is what's the most sort of cost reflective methodology to ensure the appropriate people are paying for those charges. But it's very much still a work in progress and an active discussion we're having both with gas and electricity members and also with those local authorities.
Thanks, Andy. Jeff, I hope that answers your question. And we've just had a question offline as well. So with COP starting this week, decarbonisation is a very high profile topic. How does whole system support broader achievement of net zero?
So I think it's a really great question. And, you know, if we think of where we started off a few years ago when we kicked off the whole energy systems work stream, there was a whole piece of work about bringing the gas and electricity networks together so they could understand the challenges as we decarbonise faced by each. They could almost get a common language, an approach, and the way they tackle some of these challenges. We're achieving that now, and now it's about sort of taking steps forwards to take that more strategic view, to ensure we've got the ways of working between us that are maturing, that are allowing us to achieve net zero in the most efficient and least cost way for the consumer. And I think we're beginning to get there. And you know, that's critical if we're going to achieve net zero, both in a timely manner and ultimately in a way that sort of minimises costs to both gas and electricity consumers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much agreed on that. And we've just had a comment really just in response to your answer from Jeff, which just says, to my mind, the question is, do the benefits outweigh the costs? And if so, to whom do the benefits accrue? The beneficiary should pay.
And I think that seems eminently sensible, Jeff. I wouldn't disagree with that at all.
Brilliant. Well, there are no further questions in the chat, so thank you very much for your time, Andy.
No problem.
Great. Miraculously, we are actually running not only to time, but ahead of time. So we'll just move on to the comms update, which I will run through with you now. Thank you, Annie. So it will be another busy year communicating the work that the programme is completing at pace. This will be including promoting the deliverables that our presenters have just been through, as well as looking at the bigger picture on how we can raise the prominence of the work for the programme that it's doing more generally. You'll see a grid on this slide. This is included in the work plan if you'd like to take a closer look, but to give you a broad overview, it covers a really wide range of activities from in-person events to webinars, public affairs and trade media outreach, and also engaging with different stakeholders such as community energy groups and local authorities. So this is all in our very kind of top line plan in terms of comms for next year. And then some of you will be aware that it's also our 5th year next year. So we'll be talking about this a bit more at the start of 2022 through our end of year report at first, and then through a number of different campaigns and partnerships throughout the year to celebrate this milestone. So yes, a very big year again, and very much looking forward to it. So with that, I don't believe we have any other questions. So Sotiris, I will hand back over to you if you're there.
Yes, thank you, Emily, and thank you very much, everyone, for the overview and the questions. I think at this stage, I just wanted to remind you the key date. So the key date is the 16th of November. As we discussed, we have the high-level scope document consultation is out. You know, we ran the overview just here. I hope you saw the level and the depth of activity in open networks, and it is your opportunity now to influence that work and potentially focus it in areas that are of interest to you, or show us or bring forward topics that we might not have considered, or maybe they are not as clear that we are considering them. So your feedback is going to be critical in shaping next year's program. We review all pieces of feedback and we respond to all pieces of feedback that we receive in the consultations, and we publish the responses in a similar fashion you said we did. So all of that information becomes publicly available. As we discussed for first time this year, in response to stakeholder feedback, we are publishing the high-level scope document much earlier than we used to. We used to publish the PID, the project initiation document, in January. Was the program was kind of starting off. So it's a major change for us, and you know, we hope that adds value to the stakeholder consultation process, but also we get value from stakeholders. So 16th of November, please take the opportunity to respond to the feedback. We understand not everybody has the time or the resources to go through the document, so it doesn't necessarily have to respond to all points. And if you prefer to just have a chat with Emily and Farina or myself, we can do that as well. You know, we can facilitate the feedback if your organization doesn't feel that has the time or resources to spend more than an hour or so on that. We are very happy to have a discussion and agree some points to take away and then feed them back through the process. So yeah, so Emily, reach out to Emily, use Emily as a conduit or Farina to reach out and discuss how you'd like to provide feedback. So that's on the scope document, and then as Farina described, we are introducing the challenge group, and we are introducing the independent chair role. So there's a process that is running, and again, we want to get as representative set of stakeholders in the challenge group, obviously within the terms of reference, but try to to reach out to those who can contribute. So whether you are interested, again, if you are not sure whether you are interested, I'm sure Emily and Farina will have a chat with you, and you can understand a bit more about the program and what's happening and what that might involve, and that hopefully will aid your decision making. And the same thing about independent chair. And also the other way you can help us is to spread the word. There's a lot of work that is happening. We are trying, and I think we're getting better in kind of communicating some of the work, but the work is highly technical. And in some cases, we potentially sometimes we get lost in the technical details. So, if you have the ability to communicate some of that work in a way that your group might understand, then that would be very helpful as well with us in terms of all the work we have to do for next year. So that's all from me. 16th of November and high-level scope document and challenge group are the key points. I'll pause for any final questions or points, given we have a few minutes. Is there anything that isn't clear or anyone would like to ask? Take the opportunity to ask here in the forum. That doesn't look like it. Okay, so if there are no any other questions, then the last thing I want to do is to thank you very, very much for taking the time and joining us.
Oh, apologies, Sotiris. There was just a question. Does the response to the PID need to be submitted with the challenge group application? No, that's not the case, is it?
No, it's two separate things, right?
You can do it separately.
I'm happy to answer that one. So I guess as part of the challenge group application, I think one of the things we are asking applicants to do is share their views on the high level scope as well. So I think we are encouraging people to go through what we've set out and give us their views in advance, so that when we do form the challenge group in January, we've got those points to take away and then reflect in the final work plan.
Thank you, Farina. Thanks for the clarification. So that's a specific question as part of the challenge group process. Good. Thank you very much. Cool. All right. So if there are no any further questions, then I'd like to thank you all for taking the time. I appreciate how busy everyone is. So thank you very much for joining, and have a good rest of your afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.